Welcome to Module 18, the very last module in our course on the Doctrine of God. This module is titled The Experience of God, Friendship, Grace, and Bliss. We have reached the end of the modules, and so it seems appropriate for me to talk about the end, not the end of the world, that's in the book of Revelation, not the end of the world so much as the end to which we are all heading. The goal that we are aiming for in life, the end for which we were made, the end for which God created us, to spend eternity with Him in the bliss of heaven. That is the experience of God that we were made for, and the experience of God that we hope to achieve for all eternity. Bliss in heaven. Now there's a small cottage industry right now in publishing in this country of ours about heaven, books such as Heaven is for Real and The Shack. I've never read either book, so I certainly cannot recommend them since I haven't read them, but neither am I necessarily predisposed to be opposed to them either. I mean, anything that can get the folks in our society to lift their minds and thoughts a little to heaven, well, it seems like it's a good thing to me, again, with the caveat that I haven't read either book. But I'm pretty sure that neither book really knows what it's talking about. Neither book really knows what the experience of heaven is going to be like, and I have to admit right up front, neither do I. Both the books, myself in this module, even Thomas Aquinas, were speculating on what the experience of God in heaven will be like. We are speculating, and we can base our speculations on scripture and on theology and on reason, and so these speculations can be more or less appropriate, but we have to admit, all of us, that when we're talking about the experience of God in heaven, we are truly speculating on what it's going to be like. I will offer some of my speculations toward the end of this module. I have no doubt that whatever heaven will be like, it will definitely be a surprise. I like surprises, and so it will be good beyond all of our expectations. There will be a goodness and a joy and a bliss beyond all of the speculations that theologians, even great ones like Thomas Aquinas, can come up with. What will the experience of God be like in heaven? Well, it will probably have something to do with human desire. It will probably be something along the lines of the fulfillment of human desire. Here we're starting to speculate, but I think we're on pretty good grounds for doing so. Human desire, why do we desire things that animals can't? Why do we have desires for things that brute animals never experience? Well, it's because God has placed those desires in us to begin with. And so if God has placed our capacity to desire more and more, our ability to desire more and more, if God has hardwired our souls to have desires like this, well, it seems logical and reasonable to speculate that whatever heaven will be like, it will have something to do with the utter and complete fulfillment of human desires. What I'd like to do along these lines as we start to move forward in this module is let's look at one last video clip from Father Bob Barron. Now, I think this video clip is one of his very best for lots of reasons. In this video clip, it's ostensibly about his response to the new atheists, which we met in the previous module. So you can listen to this video clip with an ear to his rebuttal of the new atheists, and I think he has some very fine arguments in this video. But also keep an ear open for what he says about human desire and the role of human desire. I want to further develop the insights that he presents in this video on the role of human desire. But let's start out by watching this video from Father Barron, again, admiring his very clear and cogent rebuttal to the new atheists, but also keep an ear open for what he says about human desire, and then I'll see you after this video clip, and we'll pick up with what he first introduces in this video on the role of human desire. Okay, here's the video now.
Yeah, just recently I heard about this. There's a campaign in Europe to raise money to put these placards on the side of buses, I think in London and Genoa, some other places. And the placards say, "There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life." And there's versions of that, like, relax, there's no God, don't worry about it. Well, here strikes me, it's another example, of course, of this campaign, the steady campaign of the new atheism against religion in general, but Christianity in particular. And I've spoken out against this many times, and what I notice is how kind of flip, popular, and deeply unintelligent this form of atheism is. And what I want to do first is contrast it with what I think is a much more serious version of atheism. Go back to the mid-20th century and the work of the existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus and others. Well, they disbelieved in God. I mean, they argued strongly against the existence of God, but they were more serious about it. They weren't just playing at atheism, they saw to the bottom of it. They knew that we have in us a deep desire for fulfillment, truth, goodness, justice. In other words, for God. But since there is no God, then, as Sartre said, la vie est absurde. Life is absurd. Life is meaningless. They knew that there's a tension between our desire for God and God's non-existence. Now, the existentialist ethic was, in the face of this storm, in the face of this terrible darkness, you assert your own freedom. You assert your own will, and you say, nevertheless, I will go on. Okay. Now, I don't think for a minute they're right about the non-existence of God, but at least the existentialists were serious about their atheism. They saw the implications of it. I think what we see now in a lot of the new atheism is a kind of frivolous or superficial or childish atheism, a kind of playing at atheism. And I think if you go back to the Bible, you will find an answer to both these forms of atheism, the frivolous and the serious forms. In the Bible, you will find passages every bit as dark as anything in Jean-Paul Sartre or Albert Camus or the existentialists. Look at a number of the Psalms, and you'll see a very deep sense of how dark and often meaningless life seems. But the best example of this is the book of Koheleth. Koheleth is an old guy, wizened, done it all, seen it all, experienced it all, had it all. Koheleth presents himself as a kind of ancient combination of Brad Pitt and Barack Obama. He's someone who's had everything. Sex, pleasure, money, power, everything. And his conclusion, he says, all is wind and chase after the wind. Or the older translation, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, it's a very perceptive book. All things that we want in life, pleasure, money, power, honor, all the usual things, he's had them. He's had them. Do they satisfy him? No. He experimented with them all, and probably for a moment enjoyed them all. But he realized in his old age, none of them finally satisfies. And this gives us, I think, the way past the atheist. Because Koheleth doesn't say, well, therefore life is absurd. Or, well, then just sort of enjoy your life. What he says is, don't put your trust, finally, in any of the goods of the world. Rather, trust in the Lord. Reorder your life to God, and then you'll find true joy. Think of a dog, for example, who's eaten his fill, who is properly sheltered, has a nice family around him. That dog is utterly content. That dog just falls blissfully to sleep. We're not like that. If, as the atheists claim, we're just clever dogs, we're just animals with bigger brains, then we would be satisfied when we have enough of food and drink and sex and pleasure and shelter. And we should just fall asleep blissfully like any dog. But the thing is, we don't. In fact, precisely when we get all those things that animals want, we're not satisfied. We want something more. That's because we have deeply ingrained in us a sense of the limitedness of this world, that there is something more. In fact, our very wiring for God proves the existence of God. We desire something which transcends the limitations of this world, means that we have within us a sort of participation in the eternal. Your hunger is not a sign that food is a projection, but your hunger, in fact, proves the existence of food. Your hunger proves the reality of food, right? It doesn't mean that food's some kind of subjective projection or an illusion. So that our desires are not misleading us. Our desires order us to realities. So our desire for God. You know, I'm going to turn something around. Religion from the time of Marx has been accused of being the opiate of the people. You know, we just take this drug that will dull our sensitivity to this world, and so we dream about heaven. See, I'm going to turn that right around. I think atheism is the opiate of the masses. I think atheism is a kind of drug. What does it mask? It masks this desire that I'm talking about. Let's just pretend I don't have a desire for anything beyond this world. I'm going to be satisfied within this world. I would submit to you, you've got to take a drug to convince yourself that that's true. You've got to take something that will dull your sensitivity to your deepest longing. That's what atheism is. You want the opium of the masses. It's precisely this trivial atheism that says, oh, just, relax, enjoy your life, take this, just pretend there's no God. See, people accuse religious people all the time of dreaming up this fantasy world. See, but atheism itself is a kind of fantasy world. Wouldn't it be nice if there's no God and I can simply find my satisfaction in this world? Wouldn't it be nice if there's no absolute moral demand? Wouldn't it be nice if I could determine my life? See, I'll turn the tables on that argument and say, well, you're denying God out of your deep psychological need. Stop taking the drug that dulls your sensitivity to the very deepest longing of your heart. It's religion that says, stop taking the drug and wake up.
Okay, again, I think that was one of his very best videos that he's posted to his website, Word on Fire, which I hope you will continue to check out even after this course concludes. He posts 2 or 3 videos a week sometimes, and they're always worth watching, and he always has some really rich theological take on things that are going on in contemporary American society. But what I want to pursue now is his insight in terms of human desire. Why do we desire things that, brute animals don't? He talks about, he uses that example from dogs. Even when a dog has absolutely everything that it wants in life, what does it do? Well, it falls asleep. It's utterly content. When all of its needs are met, it relaxes and it falls asleep contentedly. Not us. Even when we have everything that we desire in life, materially speaking, we want more and we desire more. And as good as those material things are, at first, they always wear off. They don't last. We keep restlessly wanting more, desiring more. Why? Well, because our souls are different from that of a dog or a cat. Our souls are hardwired for God. God has put into our souls a capacity, a capability to always desire more and more. We don't stop like some canine does when he receives everything that he needs for that day. Well, then he just falls asleep, not us. We constantly want more and more. Even when we have all those needs met, they wear off. They're never enough. We keep wanting more. I think we all know people like this. Now, I would never name names in a video module here, but there was a woman that I knew here in town. She was a physician. She was married to another physician, so they had lots of money. They had homes here in Aspen, Phoenix, all over the place. I mean, as soon as she finished building one spectacular home, she'd start building another one. Now, it wasn't because she was bored. She wasn't. She was a very busy, very successful physician. She had plenty of work in her life to keep her busy, but that wasn't enough either. It's because she really didn't know what she wanted in life. all the material blessings that anybody could ever want for, and then some, she had. But it wasn't enough. She kept wanting more. They kept wearing off. All the physical things just didn't last for very long. She'd take trips to these spiritual pilgrimages. She'd go to Vietnam. She'd go on all these spiritual pilgrimages trying to find something, but she never did, to my knowledge. She was always restless. She could never find what she was looking for. She had everything, materially speaking, but it wasn't nearly enough. Her desires kept driving her onward. But to my knowledge, she never arrived at any satisfaction in life. No, God has made us this way. To always want more, to always be open to more, to always desire more. And that's not a bad thing. This always desiring more, that's just the way we are. The problem, of course, is when we don't know what we want. And when we just keep desiring more and more of the wrong sort of thing, or we just keep desiring more of the things that won't do it for us spiritually, that's when there's a problem. The fact that we always want more, that is not a problem. That's the way God made us. We're always open to more and more. But the challenge for us spiritually is, what is going to be the object of our desire? If we mistake the object of our desire, then that's when the problems can set in. I think the example of this woman physician is important in the context of what Father Barron was saying about desire and human desire. And I want to connect this to the next segment of this module, which is grace. I want to tie this all together. Let me start by saying this. Grace, the grace of God, does not answer to our human desires. Grace is not just there to give us what we naturally want. Instead, grace only answers to the desires that it puts in our hearts to begin with. Let me explain this. Joel Osteen is hugely popular right now as an inspirational, motivational speaker. He packs football stadiums every time he speaks. And who wouldn't want to hear what he has to say? I mean, I don't want to belittle him. But sometimes he ends up making statements almost as bad as this, that God desperately wants you to have that Mercedes-Benz. Now, who wouldn't want to hear a message like that? I mean, other than the fact that it's just not true. Now, what Mr. Osteen is promoting is called prosperity gospel. And, you know, if his message is just about building up self-esteem, well, I mean, who can be against that? I mean, who's opposed to building up self-esteem? Not me. But the prosperity gospel goes beyond that. And it goes too far when it turns God and His grace into the means for us to get what we naturally want. Grace doesn't work like that. Prosperity gospel radically misunderstands the theology of grace. Grace doesn't give us just what we want. It certainly doesn't just give us what our human desires naturally want. Grace doesn't just, fill in the blank that our human desires create in the first place. Now, Father Barron did a great job in the video of showing that no matter how much we have, we always want more. That's true. We're hardwired for God. Our desires point us in the direction of the infinite God. That's true. But we cannot then conclude that God just wants to give us what we naturally desire, what we naturally want. That's prosperity gospel. Just believe and God will give you what you want. No, that's not the theology of grace that comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. A correct Catholic theology of grace realizes that the grace of God does not answer or fulfill human needs and the desires that we just naturally have. No, grace answers to the desires that grace puts in our hearts in the first place. Grace only answers and responds to desires that it puts there to begin with. Grace doesn't just answer to natural desires. Instead, grace creates supernatural desires in our hearts, and it answers to those supernatural desires, not the natural ones. So grace isn't just about giving us just what we naturally want. Grace is certainly not about giving us nice cars and upscale houses. That's prosperity gospel. No, rather, because of grace, we start to want what grace wants us to desire. See the difference? We start to have supernatural desires that aren't naturally there. Grace gives us these supernatural desires to begin with, and then it responds to those desires and answers and fulfills those supernatural desires in the human heart. By grace, we are given not what we want naturally. Rather, by grace, we come to want what God wants to give us. See, grace is a pure gift, a gift we could not know about or perceive in any way, shape, or form unless it was first planted in our hearts. This, I think, is the problem of modern man. He has everything, but he doesn't know what he wants. It's the problem of that friend of mine that I mentioned. She had everything, but she didn't know what she wanted. How are we to discover in life what we really want? Well, friends, it's through prayer. Prayer is the means for us to discover what we really want. Not what we think we want, not what we naturally want, but instead that which we really want and which is dormant and buried underneath all of the affluence and the busyness and the addictions and all the other stuff that just swirls around modern life. That's why what we really want in life so often goes unrecognized. It's buried underneath all sorts of other clutter. When we have so many things, so much money, so much affluence, so many homes, we can distract ourselves, but only for so long. We can distract ourselves through work, alcohol, all kinds of addictions, which always tend to crowd out the prayer. But it is in prayer that we come to discover what we truly want in life. There is no other way. Outside of prayer, we can tell ourselves all sorts of reasons. We can, think we know what we want. But it's only in prayer that we truly discover what it is in life that we really want. Any other way outside of prayer just leads down the road so brilliantly described by that modern day philosopher Mick Jagger. I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction. Now, despite the faulty syntax, it's actually a very Christian idea. Of course you cannot get any satisfaction in life if you fail to pray. You'll never know what it is that you really want in life to begin with. And if you don't know what you really want in life, how are you ever going to find it? And you'll be chasing after all sorts of things that are things that you don't really want, but they won't satisfy, so you'll end up singing that little ditty along with Mick, I can't get no satisfaction. Now, the happiest people in the world are people who get to do what they really want in life. How are you going to discover what it is you really want in life? It's only through prayer. Prayer is the channel of grace. Prayer is the means for grace to put those supernatural desires in our hearts, and then when we discover those desires, grace is more than ready to answer those, and that's when fulfillment happens. Another way of saying this is that it is through grace we are made friends of God. Now, I know for all of you listening to me, this is a rather commonplace idea that we are friends of God, that we have become friends of God. We know it's true, but we've heard it so many times that it's almost a cliche and it's a rather commonplace observance. But because we've heard it so often, we fail to notice some really important things that are going on or that had to go on in the first place for us in order to arrive at this notion that we are friends of God. According to Aristotle, friendship can only exist between equals. In his Nicomachean Ethics, he notes that the love of friends is really only possible on the basis of a fundamental equality, an equality of status between them. Properly speaking, a master cannot be friends with a slave. Although the mere fact that the two of them are human beings, that could be enough of a basis to have some kind of a relationship. But overall, you see the point of Aristotle. Friendship primarily can only exist between equals. But then how could we ever possibly be friends with God? I mean, the inequality is just too great, is it not? I mean, we cannot be friends with houseflies. And the difference between us and God is infinitely greater than the difference between us and houseflies. So of course, from our side of things, from our perspective, there's no way we could ever make ourselves friends of God. Until Jesus says this in John 15:15, I do not call you servants anymore, because a servant does not know what his master is all about. I call you friends, because I've made known to you everything I've learned from my Father. Yeah, Aristotle was right. Friendship can properly only exist between equals until Jesus came to make us the friends of God, that is. And if Jesus proclaims that now his disciples are to be his friends, this can only because, in some way, Jesus has bridged the gap. He has bridged this inequality between creator and creatures. It's been overcome, this difference. And because it's been overcome, this radical gap, this huge difference in status, because Jesus has overcome this, now, as Scripture keeps repeating, there is a new creation. We sing a new song. I mean, that's not just pretty imagery, friends. All of this talk about singing a new song, this is the truth. We sing a new song because there's been made a new creation, a new order in creation between God and the human race because of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because of him, a new order, a new relationship, a friendship has been made possible. Sure, we could never have pulled off such a feat on our own. The only reason we could be made friends of God is because God made it so on his side. Entirely gratuitous, sheer grace, pure gift. That's the only explanation for why we are now friends of God. Jesus has made it possible. Or, as St. Thomas puts it, only God can make us godlike. Now, the book that we are finishing for the class, Deification and Grace, it's going to fill in a lot of the details in terms of God making us godlike. That's the process of deification. I'm going to leave all of those details to your reading and to the book. It will explain everything there in the required detail. So read the book and understand where deification is leading, where it's heading to, the end to which it is heading, the goal, which is eternal life with God in heaven. Read the book, and it's going to allow me to skip over all of those details of the process of deification and just fast forward to the end to which we're all heading, the goal, eternal bliss with God in heaven. Sheer, unending ecstasy and joy. Now, in order to understand just a little bit what the bliss and the ecstasy of heaven will be like, we might have an insight into what this will be like by reading the work of a guy, a Hungarian professor named Mihi Csikszentmihalyi. Try saying that 3 times. Mihi Csikszentmihalyi. This guy is a Hungarian, obviously, born in 1934, came to the U.S. at the age of 21, did a doctorate at the University of Chicago. Now he's at the Claremont Graduate School. He wrote a really interesting book, published in 1990. The title of it is Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And in this book, Csikszentmihalyi outlines his theory that people are happiest when they're in a state of flow. And he defines flow like this. It's a state of concentration or complete absorption with the activity at hand and the situation. Flow is a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The idea of flow is the same as oh, I guess the feeling that runners have when they're in the zone, or athletes have when they are in the groove. This is a feeling that pretty much everyone has had at times. It's characterized by this feeling of great absorption, engagement, fulfillment, and skill during those times when we're just so into some activity requiring all of our skill and all of our abilities. We're so focused that things like food and time and all those things on our to-do list just fall away. Here's a diagram that summarizes what Csikszentmihalyi thinks about flow. Look at this diagram here. It's the difference between skill and challenge, as you see on those two outer perimeters. So when your skill level is high, but the challenge is low, you are in a state of relaxation. When the skill level is not so high and the challenge to you increases, we can easily become bored as a way of trying to get out of whatever the challenging situation is. Notice how boredom works in your life. Boredom is often our escape mechanism. You know, when something gets to be not quite so relaxing, now it's more challenging, now it's requiring more out of us, but we feel like we're not quite up to it, that's often when boredom sets in. Okay, when the skill level is low and the challenge is low, we often end up in apathy. Now, look at the ascending arrow there. You wonder why you worry about things? Well, worry often comes when the skill level is low. We can't do anything about some situation, but the challenge level is starting to rise. It's increasing. That's why we worry. Worry is our attempt to do something when we can't do anything. We have no skill that can be applied to some situation. You know, when our teenagers are out running around on the town, we can't do anything about that. There's no skill that can be applied to guiding their behavior when they're out on the town. Since we can't do anything and we perceive a challenge to our family, we start to worry. Notice anxiety, higher than worry because the challenge is greater, though again, the skill level still remains low. The important thing here is flow. Up in the upper hand corner, flow is when our skills are high, but when the challenge is high as well. The challenge is high, but the skill levels are high enough to meet that challenge. That's what makes it exhilarating. I've heard baseball players say things like, when they're really in the groove, when their skills are really tuned, when everything's clicking and they're facing a really strong pitcher, they said the baseball will come in on a fast pitch looking like the size of an aspirin. But because their skill level is so high, if they're able to hit that thing, it's sheer exhilaration. The challenge is great. I mean, a fast pitch coming in at over 90 miles an hour, that ball might look the size of an aspirin. The challenge is high, but when the skills are there to meet that challenge and contact is made and they hit that ball out of the park, it's just sheer exhilaration. That's flow. Flow is a time of being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away. Time flies. Every action, every movement, every thought just follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz, I'm told. Your whole being is involved in flow. You're just using your skills to the utmost. In his book, Csikszentmihalyi describes what can bring on flow, what gets in the way of flow, how you can move in and out of it. If you want to Google flow and then his name, Csikszentmihalyi, you can read a lot more about it. It's interesting for lots of reasons. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything that's all that spiritual necessarily. I mean, it's an interesting psychology. But I mention it here because I think we could maybe use this to think, to speculate now, in part, about heaven. Will heaven be like this? Will heaven be something like flow? You know, we've heard statements from St. Thomas that there is no time in heaven, but time drags in hell. Could this idea of flow help to explain why? I mean, when we experience flow, we lose all track of time. Time is just not part of our experience. We're so focused on what we are doing, what is at hand, what we're enjoying so much that we don't even pay attention to time. It's as if time just did not exist for us. I mean, that sounds like something St. Thomas would agree with. I mean, it's Catholic teaching that in heaven we will be so absorbed with God, we will enjoy God so much, so endlessly. God will be so endlessly fascinating that boredom just will never enter in. The mystery of God is that rich, that unending, that no matter how eternity extends, we'll never, ever have a moment of boredom. The mystery of God is that rich, that unending, that fascinating, that deep. It seems hard to imagine heaven until maybe we think of it a little bit in terms of flow, which happens to everyone, but those are just for moments, are they not? Those experiences don't last for very long, but still perhaps the limited experience of flow on earth can offer us just a glimpse of what heaven will be like for all eternity. Perhaps heaven will be for us being in a state of flow with God, unending. And remember, this really is for the very last time. Heaven will not be us looking at God as if God were just some kind of supreme being. I mean, if God were just one supreme being, then heaven could be us just staring at God for all eternity. But we are committed to this idea that God is not one individual supreme being, but is being itself, is existence itself. So whatever we're going to be doing in heaven, it won't be us just looking at God. Instead, maybe this idea of flow can help us imagine a little better what heaven may be like. Flow happens here on earth when we're so immersed in some activity, when we are using all of our skills to their highest ability, when we become so engaged with what is happening that time just falls away, and we experience instead just bliss, peace, and freedom from any and all distractions in life. That's what happens here. Perhaps that's what heaven will be like, in which we will be so immersed in God, not passively, not just us looking at Him, but instead us actively engaged with God, using all of our abilities, all of our intellect, all of our will, all of our understanding, all of our abilities to perceive, that these will all just be so immersed in the existence that is God, so engaged in God as sheer existence, so intimately participating in the existence of God that time just falls away, and we are instead just filled with such unending bliss. In heaven, our every thought, our every action, our every movement could be just so immersed in the existence that is God that bliss will just go on forever and ever. Maybe we have those momentary glimpses of bliss here on earth when we experience flow to give us an experience of what heaven will be like for all eternity. I admit, I don't know for sure. It's speculation, my speculation. But it's based on some pretty good foundations, I think, especially with the foundation based on St. Thomas Aquinas. So, with this consideration of bliss, eternal bliss with God, we have gone as far as we can possibly go in this course, and it's time for us to start to wrap things up. I've utilized the thought of Thomas Aquinas a fair amount in this module, but also really in the second half of this course. And one could maybe ask why. Why bring in all this medieval philosophy? Why not just stick with the Bible? Now that would be a wonderful course in and of itself, just images of God in the Bible. But I bring Aquinas in because I think Aquinas helps us to retain the mystery of God. I use the thought of St. Thomas so much because Thomas is so astute and never lose sight of the mystery of God. It's not as if Thomas is defining God. Never once does Thomas claim to say who God really is, other than to say that God is a mystery we will always enjoy, even if it's a mystery we will never get to the bottom of. No, more often than not, St. Thomas instead prefers to tell us what God is not. Again, this is the last time. God is not one being, for instance. God is not the supreme being. God is not physical, obviously. God is not this. and God is not that. That is Thomas's strategy in the main. Thomas knows that we as theologians are always on much firmer ground when we consider what God is not, rather than think that we can give clear and easy answers about who God is. Now, the new atheists think they know who God is, but they are wrong. They are very wrong. They are very misled by their ideas of God. But I don't want to end the course by being too hard on them. I mean, it's an easy trap for anyone to fall into, thinking that we know exactly, clearly, easily who God is and what God does and who God does it for. No, much better to freely admit, as does Thomas, as does Job, as do all the greatest saints and mystics of the Catholic Church, that it's easier for us to say what God is not, rather than to say what God is. Other than perhaps this, we can say with certainty that God is love, as Scripture so clearly illustrates. We can say that because He's created us, we as His creatures, we've been given the gift of existence, and because we exist, because we are here, we are already in some kind of an intimate relationship with God. A relation that will only deepen and grow ever richer later on when we spend eternity with Him in heaven, please God. Because this is why God created us, for us to be with Him forever in unending bliss. This is the God that we worship and adore, the God who pursues us, who refuses to give up on us until He has us lodging safely with Him forever in the bliss of eternal joy in heaven. That's who God is. A God who's willing to do whatever it takes, even going so far as to die for us in order to claim us for Him, to bring us home, to be with Him in unending joy. We can definitely say that about God. Our God is the God who pursues each and every one of us, doing whatever it takes until we belong to Him. So don't look right now, friends, but He is closing fast. Okay, thank you very much for all of your fine work, all of your attention throughout this entire course. It has been just a joy for me to spend this time with you and to work with you online and electronically in the threaded discussions. There is one last final reading assignment and one kind of wrap-up threaded discussion question waiting for you in your study groups. I'm already looking forward to our next class together, which will be next semester. Until then, thank you for everything. It's been such a joy for me to be with you. Until we meet again in our next class, goodbye and God bless.